All right. Thanks for joining us today. We are going to get started. We're here today to talk about workforce housing as a climate solution. If that's not what you're here to talk about, we won't be offended if you want to go off to another workshop. To get started, let me introduce myself. My name's Hilary Hobbs. I'm with the Town of Truckee in California. I've been with Truckee for about 9 years, and I'm the Director of Neighborhood Services and Sustainability for the town. So what that means is I get to oversee a rockstar team that includes our housing programs, sustainability, economic development, short-term rental management, and a couple other programs. So I get to spend my days thinking about those individual programs, but also how they intersect and support each other, which makes it super interesting. And that's really what we're going to talk about today, is how climate and housing work together. I'd like to introduce my co-presenter, Colin.
Hello, everybody. I'm Colin. Apparently, I only own one shirt, turns out. But, I'm not into fast fashion, so I'm here. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Placemate. And my background is I spent about 10 years in tech working at companies like Lyft and Airbnb. And then in 2018, I started Placemate with my wife and co-founder in the back, Kai, there. And we're here today actually with our whole team. So they're actually in the back row from Placemate. So we kind of intersected our annual planning team. They're all in Tahoe. We've actually moved to Portland, Maine. So I'm no longer a mountain town resident, but a lover forever. And yeah, we're really excited to be here today to kind of talk about, as Hilary said, workforce housing and a program that we sort of came up with out of necessity and has become a really interesting model for other mountain towns as well. So if you want to go to the next slide for me. So this is the Town of Truckee, and we're going to be talking about the Lease to Locals program, as well as a few other programs. I'm going to kind of go through the background of how the program came to be, what the Lease to Locals program is all about, and then Hilary's going to shift sort of into impact. And our hope is that you walk away with some actionable ideas on how you could bring a program like Lease to Locals to life in your town. We're going to talk for maybe 20, 25, 30 minutes, depending on how fast we talk, and hope to have a lot of discussion. I see some familiar faces, and I think this will be a really interesting discussion. Let's go to the next slide. It's a climate conference, so I want to start with my favorite climate quote, and actually really the inspiration for the company. So this is from Carl Elefante: "The greenest building is the building that already exists." He coined this in 2007. He's been talking about this his whole career, just came out with a new book called Going for Zero, so worth checking out his work. And then the picture on the left is Tahoe Donner. It's in Truckee. It's a planned vacation community of 6,500, mostly second homes and vacation homes. And this is kind of where my story with Truckee and Placemate begins, because this is what I knew of for Truckee, living in San Francisco Bay Area, coming up on the weekends, using friends' family houses or renting Airbnbs, actually working at Airbnb at this time. And, much like many of you, the mountains called me, and I finally convinced Kai. Just took a picture there. I said, hey, I think we should quit our jobs and move to the mountains. I knew Airbnb. I knew there was a lot of housing. I thought, how hard is it going to be if we move there to find a place to live, right? Shocker, right? It was very hard. And that was really kind of the inspiration for us, is that, we came from a really hard housing market in San Francisco. It was, expensive and hard to find a place. In Truckee, it wasn't just that it was impossible to find a place and it was hard to find a place, is that you see a sea of empty second homes around you. And you think to yourself, why is it like this? So the hypothesis we had was, what if we reach out to second homeowners and say, hey, what if we convert your property into a long-term rental and help you find a tenant, and we'll do all the work and you can feel good about your house, not sitting empty anymore. So that was really the impetus for the beginning of the idea of the company. And then we had friends that moved to the Town of Truckee, and they were going away for 6 weeks, and they said, okay, why don't you guys do that? Come on up here. You can stay in our house, find a place to live, figure out what you want to do. And the light bulb really just, the onion kept, sort of unpeeling the layers and realizing there's something here. Let's go to the next slide. And there was already a lot of people working on this. So some of you may be familiar with this organization, the Town of Truckee Community Foundation. In 2017, they started the Mountain Housing Council, which is a really interesting collaboration between 29 nonprofit, public, private sort of entities, really great individuals. The first thing they had done is a mountain housing needs assessment for the kind of area of the Town of Truckee area, identifying the gaps. And one of the things we found most interesting was they identified the gap from, I need a room for a season to work as a lifty, to I am the fire chief and I need a place to live with my family and I have a high AMI. So we kind of looked in there and thought, all right, back to our original idea, how could we plug into the Mountain Housing Council? What could we do to work with them? And interestingly enough, they had done a survey of second homeowners saying, why is your house sitting empty? What would it take for you to convert that property? You know, essentially this sort of the framework for our idea. And we said, well, we want to run with that. And they gave us a grant. So in 2019, we collaborated and incubated what was then called Landing, the name of the company and the idea, the online marketplace for locals housing. I kind of coined it the anti-Airbnb. I'm sort of defector of Airbnb and felt like this is my penance to, you know, kind of give back to the town that we were now members of. We did find a long-term rental, thankfully, and so we were able to stay. If you go to the next slide. And what was really great about the Mountain Housing Council and digging into the insights is that we could identify where our audience was. So there were 35,000 housing units in the North Lake Tahoe, Truckee area. Most of them are empty most of the year. As you guys, this probably sounds familiar for some of the towns you live in. Meanwhile, 2,500 employees are commuting in every day. So our kind of feeder city is Reno, and sometimes to the west into Sacramento and Nevada City. It can be a 45-minute drive. It can be a 2-hour drive. And it can be really terrible for a company attrition, employee satisfaction. Obviously, they're working in the area and would like to live in the area. And then the picture on the left is sort of a joke, but is a real picture I took in June of 2019 of a house that had fallen off its foundation because no one lived there over the winter, and the snow load was so big that it slid right off the foundation. Kai and I went and took a picture of it, and the neighbors came out and said, "You're never going to believe it. This is the second time this happened to this house." I don't know why they rebuilt it and didn't do something about it, but with the grant that we got from the Community Foundation, our initial kind of outreach was, don't let your second home sit empty this winter. And we got a lot of people calling us and saying, okay, what's this all about? What are you doing? How can, you know, I get involved? What do I have to do? And that was really, I think, our aha moment was the way that Airbnb created a new marketplace for people to rent strangers' houses. There's a trust that needed to be created, and we've kind of bridge that divide. So the second homeowner here owned their house for a long time, aged out of using it, used to use it a lot when the kids were in ski school, and now it sits empty. The local employee doesn't want to drive from Reno, hates their commute, putting a million miles on their car every day. How can we connect them? And so that's kind of the initial proof of concept of what was then called Landing. So in our first 6 months, we converted 15 properties from, again, empty second homes, short-term rentals, into long-term rentals for the local workforce, housed about 35 people. And then in the fall of 2019, we paused the business to have a baby, and then came out of that and said, all right, let's get this business going again right in the beginning of 2020. And that was really not the best time to restart the company. But also, it really put the fire under us because COVID started and everything got much worse, right? And first there was is anybody ever going to come to Truckee again? We said, hey, actually, we don't want visitors. Don't come to town, like cancel bookings. And then it was everybody came. So in the summer of 2020, it really was a aha moment of, okay, what we're doing is so important and we need to figure out a way to accelerate our efforts. And so if you go to the next slide, and you guys, if you sat and got a notebook, there's a few up here, you've got a postcard in here that has this same postcard. This is where the collaboration began with the Town of Truckee. So the woman who was running the Mountain Housing Council was a woman named Shauna Doherty. She came over to join Hilary and start the housing division at the Town of Truckee. And she said, I think we should collaborate. What if we offered a cash incentive to homeowners to convert their second homes and their short-term rentals into a new long-term rental? And we had a lot to figure out. This was the first time us as a startup, as a private entity had ever interfaced with the public agency. I'd never been to a council meeting in my life. I didn't know what program guidelines were. I didn't understand how any of this was going to work, but we had a really great partner who was thinking innovatively, and we had really sort of supportive elected officials that said, this is worth trying. So it started out in November of 2020 as a one-time cash incentive of $3,000. So you can see the number's quite a bit higher now, but it was geared at smaller units, ADUs, locals that had extra room, and it was really successful. We got great outreach, and over the last 5 years, the program is modified and housed hundreds of people. Hilary's going to go in depth, and I've got some partners in the room here. We've brought this to 15 other communities across the country, and Kai and I are in Portland, Maine, so we're doing Cape Cod and the islands and other tourist communities. So we'll be sharing more about how we can collaborate potentially on programs like these. But this program has been a really interesting and I think needed public-private partnership. We could move at the speed of a startup and be nimble and adaptive. The town could provide the guidance and the know-how and most importantly, the funds. And so that's been the collaboration for the program for the last 5 years. And I'm going to hand it back to Hilary.
Thanks, Colin. I want to start by sharing two of the guiding principles that really direct the town of Truckee's efforts at workforce housing, and in particular at programs that utilize our existing housing stock. And the first, Colin alluded to, but to state it directly, the town of Truckee does not have a housing shortage. We certainly have a workforce housing shortage. We certainly have a housing crisis, but we actually have a surplus of housing units. In our town, we have 13,700 housing units. We have 16,700 residents. We have an average household size of 2.4 people. If you do the math, we actually have a housing surplus. So we choose to look at that as an asset for our community and something that we can leverage in our housing solutions. The second guiding principle is that we simply cannot build our way out of our housing crisis. New development is certainly one of the tools in our toolbox, but it's not going to satisfy all of our need. So we look heavily towards our existing housing stock and how we can creatively find ways to reuse that in different ways and incentivize property owners to make that shift. One of the key reasons why utilizing your existing housing stock is so beneficial is simply timing. Our timeline to develop new housing units in the Tahoe and Truckee area is easily 3 to 5 years between land acquisition, design, entitlements, financing, construction in a harsh mountain environment. If you can align the incentives correctly and find property owners who are interested, you can convert a housing unit in a matter of weeks. This is a familiar story in many of our mountain towns. Housing really affects our local workforce. How many of you work for an employer that has trouble recruiting new employees because of the cost or availability of housing? How many of you know a business in your community that has either had to reduce hours or even closed because they can't recruit employees? And how many of you know a rock star employee in your community who commutes from outside the area and then just gets sick of the commute and says, I can't do this anymore, and they end up leaving your community? Yeah. So these are challenges for our community members. They're challenges for our businesses and our economy at large. And workforce housing is also a challenge in our efforts to reduce vehicle miles traveled, because the housing crisis tends to lead to longer and longer commute distances and times. Unlocking your existing housing stock is a key strategy to help address all of those challenges. Unlocking your existing housing stock also helps to preserve community character. This is a picture of the Truckee Artist Lofts, which is a 76-unit affordable housing development that opened in 2021. Much needed housing units. It's the first 4-story building built in Truckee, but in the eyes of many of our longtime community members, this is a skyscraper. It has caused so much community consternation because it simply doesn't blend in with the surrounding context in our historic downtown. And as I said, new development is certainly one of the tools in addressing workforce housing for our community, but we found is we have a lot less community concern and pushback when we take an existing vacation home and are able to convert that to a long-term rental versus new construction like this development. And finally, utilizing existing housing stock is a key strategy because we simply can't afford to address our housing crisis through new construction alone. Here's a comparison of some of our costs. Our incentive programs for existing housing programs are far cheaper than new development. Our Lease to Locals program provides an average incentive of a little under $8,000 per housing unit. Our deed restriction purchase program, which I'll talk about more in a couple minutes, has an average incentive of a little over $110,000 per unit. In Truckee, the cost of building a modestly sized accessory dwelling unit, about $500,000. And we're doing due diligence right now for a potential new workforce housing development with 75 units, mix of 1 to 3 bedroom units, apartments and townhomes, and we're looking at an average cost per door of $940,000, which just makes my brain hurt. We simply don't have the budget to address all of our housing needs through new construction. So how has this worked for Truckee? In the past 5 years, we've had 234 properties participate in the Lease to Locals program. Those units have housed 570 individuals. That's a mix of what we call our qualified members of the workforce. So we have income restrictions and then a geographic boundary that they need to work within to qualify. It also includes family members and children of those qualified members of the workforce. That average annual income per qualified tenant is just under $58,000. That's 71% of our county's area median income. And what that tells me is that this program is succeeding in housing individuals who otherwise would struggle to find housing in our community at market rates. So those are the folks who would be priced out and would be moving down the hill and having long commutes. Our average rent per property is about $2,500. And then one of the results that, frankly, I've been most surprised by and most proud of is we have about a 70% retention rate. So that means that after a property owner has graduated from the program and is no longer eligible to receive incentives because it's a one-time incentive for their 6-month or year commitment, 70% of those property owners are deciding to continue to long-term rent to members of our workforce, which we're really proud of. So this truly is serving as a workforce housing conversion program, which was the intent. So why are we talking about this at a climate conference? In the Truckee area, we have about 50% of our local workforce lives within Truckee, which we're pretty proud of that, and we try to maintain that amount. We have about another 25% that lives in the region, so mainly North Tahoe or the Sierra Valley north of Truckee, and an additional 25% are in-commuters from outside the region. The vast majority of our in-commuters are coming from the Reno, Nevada area. It's about a 70-mile round-trip commute up the River Canyon. And what we've found is over the past decade, as our longtime residents are feeling more and more priced out of the Truckee region, there's an outflow of residents in our workforce down the hill to Reno. And as the Reno housing market has also gone up, the areas of Reno that are closest to Truckee have gotten even more expensive, and folks are getting priced out of those closer regions, so they're having even longer commutes. So we're pushing an hour, 80, 90-mile commutes to get up the hill to Truckee. So it's difficult to precisely estimate the GHG impacts of a program like this because we simply don't know where a resident would end up if they didn't end up in a Lease to Locals unit. But to get an idea, we have here a snapshot of an average in-commuter from Reno. So they're commuting about 16,000 miles a year. GHG impact about 6.4 metric tons of CO2. So what we're trying to do with programs like this is provide options for folks who are feeling priced out so that they can stay in the community. And it's also a key strategy so that when we recruit new employees, the default isn't go live in the North Valleys outside of Reno and commute an hour to get here. So we have options for them locally as they move to our to work in our region. I wanted to touch on a couple of our other programs that utilize existing housing stock. Lease to Locals was our first such program, but over the past 4 years, we've introduced 2 others. The first is called Rooted Renters, which is really the sister program to Lease to Locals. It's also run by Placemate in collaboration with the town, and we developed it in collaboration with them. So when we developed Lease to Locals, we really intended that as a long-term rental conversion program. So how do we take these vacant units that Colin talked about and provide incentives to convert them to a different use? What we found during COVID in particular, as our housing market got really hot, is a lot of our longtime landlords were taking that opportunity to sell off their rental housing units. So as we were gaining new units through programs like Lease to Locals, we were also losing some of our rental inventory. So we designed this program to be a long-term rental preservation program. The way that we make that work is instead of a 1-year commitment, we ask property owners to commit to 3 years, renting at below market rate rents. And we entice them to stick with the program by providing increasing incentives throughout the program. So we save 40% of the total incentive for after they've completed year 3, with the idea that that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow is enough to make them stick with it. We launched that program a little over a year ago. We committed to a pilot of 2 3-year cohorts. So we just started our second cohort with that program. We don't have final results yet since we're still in the middle of it, but the program's been extremely popular. We had funding the first year for 23 units, 23, thank you, Isaac. Those slots filled up in a matter of hours when we opened the program. We convinced our town council to double the funding for the second cohort, so we expect to fill about 45 homes through the program, and those slots are almost filled at this point as well. A second or final program that we have that utilizes our existing housing stock is a Truckee Home Access Program. This is our deed restriction purchase program. So this acts similar to a down payment assistance program, but layered on with that is a long-term deed restriction so that once a housing unit comes into the program, it will be preserved as for workforce housing in perpetuity. So the way that works is a member of our local workforce applies to the town to make sure that they meet all the qualifications. And once they are approved, they go out on the open market and find a home that they would like to put in an offer for. Once they put in an offer, they come back to our program administrator. We work with them through the escrow process, and at closing, the town pays them, the new owner, that is, 16% of the appraised value of the home. The buyer does not need to pay those funds back. In exchange for that, what the town gets is a long-term deed restriction, which means that that property can only be used either by that family who's purchasing it, or it can be rented to a qualified member of the local workforce if they, say, get a job outside of town, but they want to maintain ownership. Once they go to sell, they can only resell to members of the local workforce. So this has been an extremely popular program. We've deed restricted 31 homes so far in the past 4 years. So we're pacing at about 10 homes a year right now. We think that'll pick up as interest rates drop. It's been sort of a tight market with the high interest rates over the past few years. So how can you bring programs like these to your community? I want to touch on a couple of the key ingredients that are sort of form our secret sauce for new housing programs in Truckee. The first, which Colin talked about at the beginning, is data collection. I think for all of us, it's easy to look around our community and say, anecdotally, we know we have a housing problem. But when you say that, what do you actually mean? How many units do you need? What are the area median income ranges that struggle to afford market rate housing? What unit sizes do you need to satisfy that need? What types of units? Being able to tell the story of who are the individuals in your community who are struggling to find housing, and how does that impact the fabric of your community? Is it your teachers? Is it your firefighters? Is it your service workers that are impacting your businesses because they can't open? Being able to tell that story is critical to garner support for these types of programs. The second 2 ingredients tie back to that data collection piece, and the first is funding. So we launched the Lease to Locals program initially with a small amount of general fund dollars just to get it off the ground, but simultaneously started working on a long-term funding strategy to support programs like this. We were successful at doing that through a ballot measure to increase transient occupancy tax or hotel tax, short-term rental tax by 2%. That gives us about $1.2 million a year to fund programs like this. Frankly, it's not enough. We're already starting to work on an additional funding study to look at other strategies so we can continue to scale our housing programs. And the final key ingredient is political support. And again, being able to tell your story and making sure that all of your policymakers really understand the housing crisis and how it's impacting the community has been critical for us in being able to get support to move forward programs like this. And we're really lucky in Truckee. We have a town council that is very open to trying new things and just seeing how it works out, and then pivoting and adjusting as needed. So that's really what we have done with this program. I think we've revised the specifics of the Lease to Locals program probably 4 times over the past 5 years, just slightly adjusting the incentive amounts, some of the qualifications, sort of unusual situations come up that we say, like we have to figure out how to address that particular situation. And our council has been very open to revisiting and trying to continue to iterate and make it better. So with that, that brings us to the end of our formal presentation, but we wanted to leave plenty of time for questions, your ideas, thoughts on how we can improve the program, whatever you got. Yeah, that's a great question. I can start with that from the town perspective, and Colin may have some other ideas. To be honest, when we came up with this program idea, and as we were getting ready to launch Lease to Locals at first, one of the common sort of pieces of feedback or sort of things we heard in the community was, who's going to use that? Second homeowners own second home because they want to use it as their second home. This is a silly idea. I don't think anyone's going to take that incentive. And that's fine. There are many second homeowners who are not going to use this type of a program because they do come up every other weekend and they have their kids in ski school and they do use their second home frequently. However, there is a subset out there that for whatever reason their kids have aged out of ski team or they no longer ski themselves, whatever their reason, but they want to hold on to their home as an asset and it is sitting there underutilized. So we found that there is a market that is interested in utilizing their home in other ways. Some of them is just purely an economic thing of like, hey, I could make some additional revenue by renting it out and I get an incentive as well that's helpful. Others really do it because they see this as something that's beneficial to the community. And a lot of our second homeowners have been connected to the community for many years. They feel very invested in Truckee, even if they are not a full-time resident. We've had a couple of property owners who have participated in this program and then said, you know what, I'm really not using my second home. I was fine with renting it out for 6 months or a year through this program. I think I'm ready to move on from owning a second home in Truckee. Now I want to look to sell it into the deed restriction program because I would like to be part of the housing solution. So we love hearing stories like that and how people are feeling invested in our solutions. Anything to add?
No, that was great. Was honestly a little bit of just an experiment based on what we had for budget and our goals. It's since then been pretty prescriptive based on we look at what the short-term rental average nightly rates are in occupancy compared to what market rate would be. You asked about the kind of what are the restrictions on rent. So in the town of Truckee for Lease to Locals, the maximum rent you can charge regardless of unit size is $3,500 per month. But not everyone goes there because not all units are the same. This is not affordable housing where we say a one bedroom has to be $1,200 a month, has to serve this AMI. We let it kind of right size in. And so for Lease to Locals, we find most people rent well below the rent cap. As Hilary showed, it was $2,500 per month is the average rent. So if you have a room for rent, you're certainly not going to rent it at $3,500 or lower. And what we find is that people kind of right size into it. It helps with retention a lot, that the rent is kind of what the tenant can afford. The incentive is used by the owner, potentially, going back into the house or to offset what they might have been getting on the short-term rental market. So every case is slightly different. We build the program guidelines to be really flexible, but you have to start somewhere. We started at 3,000. We ratcheted it up to maximum 10,000. It's now maximum 18,000. Some of our markets where we operate this, like in Nantucket, it's $27,000 because Nantucket is crazy expensive. Average single-family home, average house there is 2.1 million or median. Truckee's 1.2 for comparison. I think Summit County and other places are right around there as well that you live in. So yeah, that's kind of the answer to that question. So for Lease to Locals, it's a one-time incentive based on the number of qualified tenants. So it's 18,000 if you put 4 qualified tenants in. If you just did one, it would be $4,500. So it's based on, you can kind of see actually if you guys do have the postcard, or we can go back to it, it's based on the number of qualified tenants. So when people call us, we ask them, how big is your house? What have you been doing with it? Kind of go back to, so for example, if you want to rent a room to a local employee, just a seasonal rental, it would just be a $2,000 incentive on top of the rent. But if you rent your whole home for 12 months, $13,500 or even higher up to $18,000.
Second question on how do we set market rate Is that the second piece? So that is for our rooted renters program, where we do have a rent cap based off unit size. So we decided to be a little bit more prescriptive and try to push rents down a bit below market. It was a little bit of science and a little bit of art to figure out exactly where we landed there. So we have a wonderful housing program analyst who runs our programs, who tracks housing market data for rentals. So she looks at, all of the rental platforms, Zillow, Airbnb, or not Airbnb, Facebook Marketplace, sort of all the things every month. And so we can really track the data on what we're seeing for rental advertisements to get us a pretty good sense of how our market is doing. We've been doing that consistently for probably 3 or 4 years. We have pretty good data there. It is certainly a range, but it gives us a good sense of sort of what is the median 2-bedroom going for, what's the median 3-bedroom. So we started with that. We also looked at affordability based off of area median income and bedroom count, and then we sort of tried to find a sweet spot between them that was a couple $100 below the median rental price, but still felt like pretty reasonable, could be afforded by a lower AMI household, but still was something that wasn't so low that landlords wouldn't take advantage of the program. So we had a little bit of sort of back and forth and triangulating between different data points to come up with our matrix on maximum rent amounts and incentive amounts for each household size. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great question, and I could talk for hours about that particular question. I don't know if everybody heard. So this program is really sort of a carrot. How do we provide incentives? The flip side is, are there sticks we might want to use? How do we provide disincentives for the behavior we might want to see less of? So yes, one of the key things that we have done pretty aggressively is short-term rental policies. So we launched this program in early 2020. Sort of simultaneously with that, we were starting to think about short-term rental regulations. Then COVID heated up, and it got really necessary for us to look at that. We were getting a lot of community members pressuring the town to do something about it. So we did do a pretty substantial community process to study short-term rentals and come up with regulations, including a cap on the number of units. That leads to a pretty long wait list to get a permit. We also have a 1-year waiting period after a home sells before the new owner can even get on the wait list to purchase a property, which helps provide opportunities for people to short-term rent as a secondary use of a home, but cuts down on the incentive or opportunity for people to purchase homes for the primary purpose of short-term renting. So that was sort of the goal of our policies there. So we have put that in place. That has actually worked really well with having a program like Lease to Locals, because now when we tell a new property owner, you're going to have to wait for a year before you can get on the wait list, and then once you get on the wait list, it's about 14 months before you can get a permit. We can say, but we have this great other program where you can earn money while long-term renting the home as you wait for your permit. So it actually has worked in tandem with that. We have also done an initial study looking at vacancy tax, which I have to say, short-term rentals was one of the most controversial things that we've ever dealt with in Truckee. Vacancy tax was even more controversial, just dipping our toe in with an initial study on that. There have been some legal challenges to vacancy taxes in California, so our council wisely said, we're going to take a pause on this and let things shake out legally, sort of see what emerges. It would be really helpful if we had some well-trod paths on sort of how to approach this before this is something we even consider, because it's a pretty complex issue. But it's something we may look at some point in the future as well.
Yeah, it's a good question. So we talk to every homeowner that's interested, the team of 5 that I have behind you. So on that postcard, there's a phone number. It goes right to the team member working on Truckee's program, and they'll answer their initial questions of, usually it's, okay, how does this work? What's the catch? Or, hey, do I have to give up my short-term rental permit? What's going on here? And so we're kind of guiding them through the process initially of just, how do you qualify? What have you been doing with the property? Are you a better fit for rooted renters because you're an existing landlord? Are you looking at lease to locals? Are you looking to deed restrict your program? So we're kind of like I wouldn't say we're the customer service for the housing department, but we're certainly administering these programs and guiding them through the process and helping them understand if they can qualify. Then they'll often kind of go and branch out, do I have tenants in mind or do I need help with tenants? And our website, if you go to placemate.com, it's actually positioned still as the local marketplace for tourist towns. So there's, I think, 31 active listings for properties through lease to locals and rooted renters that you as a tenant could apply for. And so a lot of owners will say, yeah, I need help finding a tenant. Can you help me find one? And they post on our site, and we have a renter profile created by the renters. We, again, make sure everything is kind of above board for the qualifications for the program. Do you work locally? Are you under the AMI? Who are your roommates? And then we gather all that documentation and submit it to a woman named Lynn that you referenced earlier, the housing analyst. She looks at the entire package, and then we say, yep, we want to pay that incentive. And for lease to locals, it's paid out in 2 installments. It's paid out up front. So if you, let's say you qualified for $9,000, you get $4,500 when the lease is signed. We do review leases. We don't require a specific lease, but we like to make sure that all the lease terms that are, normal for a California lease are upheld. And if we see anything weird, we'll flag it. Then you get at the 6-month point, we check on the lease to make sure that they're still in compliance, the tenant's still living there, or tenants. And then at the end, we check again, and we ask them, what are you going to keep doing? We want to know from a retention standpoint, are you going to keep renting to them? As Hilary said, most of the time they do, and then we cut the second check. Or the town cuts it, so we're kind of the connection between the tenant, the homeowner. In a perfect world, they actually never interface with the town except to get the check from the Town of Truckee. We did send letters for the first 30 properties, I think, where we said, thank you so much, this is so great, and we found that the check is actually the thank you. So, yeah.
There has been consideration. We have not put anything in place yet at this point. So we're working on some energy efficiency incentive programs and trying to figure out sort of how do these programs interface. Two of the challenges I guess we're considering as we do that are, how do we make sure that sort of timing aligns. We don't want to displace a tenant while there's major work going on in the home. So that's one consideration. And then we also consider, how do we put in place safeguards so that the property owner isn't making major upgrades and then jacking the rent up. So we thought about maybe we use the pool of people who have already participated in the program and go to those property owners and try to get them to participate. We haven't quite finalized a program yet, but it's certainly something we're thinking about. Yes, and that gets back to our housing needs assessment and really understanding your housing market and your data. And Colin alluded to, we started with that with Mountain Housing Council back in 2017 as one of our first steps. We actually have continued to do that every 2 to 3 years to update the data and make sure we really understand our market and how to define what we call our missing middle. So that's a common term that's used to define households that make too much to qualify for traditional affordable housing, which is traditionally capped at 80% area median income, but don't make enough to qualify for market rate housing. So we look at that range for our programs. The way that we have defined that in Truckee, and we sort of refine every couple of years, is for the rental market. Our missing middle goes up to 180% AMI. For sale product, it goes up to 245% AMI. So our deed restriction purchase program actually has a higher AMI cap.
Yeah, and Placemate did collaborate with the city of Ketchum on the Lease Locals program and extended into the Sun Valley area. And that was, we never thought we'd convert the big homes in Elkhorn or, sort of north of Ketchum. It was a lot about the smaller units, the units in, 1-2 bedroom. And we had modest success, but Sun Valley was an example, Sun Valley Ketchum, of a program that ran its course and did not continue after about 3 years. The council's direction was to move into rooted renters, so we did that. And then they actually are trying to find a sustainable funding source to go much more on the deed restriction side, so the permanent. And I would say that for us, we've started with Truckee and got some other partners from Breckridge here. We've run Lease to Locals programs in 15 markets, and they're almost always successful if we start with the data and get alignment around what are we trying to achieve, what are your needs, how much money do you have the political will. The sort of market that comes to mind that maybe is the least successful was Woodstock, Vermont. I don't know if we have any East Coasters in here, but really small market. They had about 800 housing units and a really small budget, and we just couldn't break through. We tried for 6 months. We increased the incentives. We tried for 6 more months. They brought it in-house, and they've had really modest success getting maybe 1 or 2 properties a year. So you see from the results we've had in Truckee, if you really want to superpower this and you have the political support and you have the money, you can do something. But it is, don't target the giant homes. When people ask us this question earlier, someone said, who's going to do this? If you have $1,000 a night short-term rental in Breckridge or Aspen or wherever, keep doing that. That's great for the economy. We want that home. Maybe not everyone does. I think there's a balance of tourism needed. So the big homes may never convert. The $1,000 a night short-term rentals may never convert. But there are a lot of homes sitting that maybe used to be a long-term rental or in a neighborhood that was full of long-term rentals and converted to short-term rental, converted to second homes. Those are the ones we're going after. And these programs they don't micro-target neighborhoods, but we see in the data, where we claw back some of that inventory with Lease to Locals. I mean, anecdotally, the short answer is probably not really. I can't think of anything. It's a lot of it is anecdotal, right? So there's nothing with the number of housing units that we've converted, through Hilary's team, deed restriction and rooted renters and Lease to Locals. We're talking about maybe 300 units out of 13,000. So if you drive around that neighborhood Tahoe Donner, on tonight, let's say, there's going to be 6,000 lights off at 8 p.m. And, maybe we turned on 30 of them. And that's big for the neighbors. That's big for those people. But I don't think we've seen a huge ripple effect yet in that way. But funding sources continue. We keep running this program. One thing that is anecdotally we've talked to 1,000 property owners in the town of Truckee through Lease to Locals. And that is, burgeoning on 10% of the housing stock. So we're having the conversation with people. So I think over time we could start to see the impact layering on with building workforce housing. I think, this is about not just stopping the bleeding, but trying to turn a corner a little bit. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I will say, anecdotally, we see the impact with our employees and our employers. It's a relatively modest number compared to our total population, but for those individuals it has made a world of difference. And we are seeing even like town employees, we've had several who have been housed through these programs, and it's kept employees with our organization, which is huge for us. It's kept them from having long commutes and feeling like they have sort of a path forward and opportunities to stay in Truckee. So in that way it's been impactful. Oh, that's a great question. So we started with, I can't remember our initial budget for this program, but probably in the couple $100,000 for this and a couple other of our small housing programs. Once you introduce deed restriction or down payment assistance programs, those are much higher dollar values. It's comparing apples to oranges because it's a much longer term investment, but we are looking at around $100,000 per unit, both for our deed restriction purchase for existing units, which is what I talked about, as well as our deed restriction purchase for new development, which is another program that we also have. The incentive amount ends up being about the same per door for us. The town has adopted a goal of deed restricting 10% of our housing stock by 2032. We're about halfway there. So that includes all of our affordable housing units, which are developed through tax credit programs and things like that, as well as our missing middle programs that there really aren't state and federal funding sources for. So that's all local funding to develop those units. So we just did a back of the envelope calculation to figure out, okay, if we do this all through our deed restriction purchase programs, what is it going to take to get there by 2032? And we're looking at upward of $50 million. Our budget right now for deed restrictions is about $1.2 million. I think we started around 500,000. So just to pilot it. Right now, with our deed restriction purchase for the existing units, Truckee Home Access Program, with our current interest rates, we're able to essentially meet the demand for that program. So we're on pace with about 10 units a year. As interest rates come down, we anticipate demand will go up. So we may need to go back to our council and say, we're out of funds mid-year. What do you want to do? Should we tap into an additional fund source to keep this program going? Or are we just going to sort of max out for the year because that's all that we can afford? So our deed restriction purchases is the main reason why we're launching an additional funding study right now, because those are very high price tag units to acquire, but we really see it as that 50-year investment in our community. Yeah, I can address the first part of that, and then maybe Colin wants to talk about sort of the business model piece. So in Truckee, we do have a regional housing authority. I think it's 5 counties, including our county, which is Nevada County, California. It is focused on low income, sort of affordable housing. It doesn't have any programs or sort of dip its toe into the missing middle piece. So that was the gap that we saw of like this is, and they at this point that's not really an interest that they have of getting involved in. They sort of have their hands full with what they're already doing. We also do have a workforce housing agency, Truckee Tahoe Workforce Housing Agency, which is a joint powers authority between 7 government agencies in the Truckee and North Tahoe area. So there's 2 counties, Nevada County and Placer County, the Town of Truckee, our hospital, which is a public hospital special district, our school district, one of our utilities. So we work together on housing. It sort of started focused just on housing solutions for public employees of those member agencies. We're starting to dip our toe into how do we support the broader workforce as well. So that's a conversation that we have had. I just had a strategic planning meeting yesterday about this of like, so what is the role of the JPA? Should they get involved sort of in more of the program administration? Because that sort of got stood up after we had already launched this type of program. We've found that we have a partner that's really working for us and has the program dialed, and we're not particularly interested in making a change at this point. But I'll let Colin talk about the business model.
Well, that's good to hear. Okay, so yeah, I mean, we can talk more about specifics, but when we started the company, I mean, originally the business model was we'll charge the homeowners for essentially a tenant screening service. And, that was an interesting way to approach people. But then you were saying, we're trying to get you something to do something differently, and you have to pay for it. Now we're offering to pay you. And so we charge the town for our services. And the way we think about it as an extension of the housing department, we are cheaper than a full-time hire for us to have a 1-year contract. And we're really good at it. And we keep doing innovations on the program. We add in other programs. So this has become our specialty. We run these 2 programs, Lease to Locals and Renters, it's been a total of 15 jurisdictions. And we have had people say, hey, we want to, council members especially say, hey, can we do this internally? And often the department lead says, no, we do not have the resources. We want to hire these guys. We got referred by them. I mean, I think we're happy to chat more about, sort of how an IGA could be involved. We have had some instances of working with partner agencies, especially if they offer, like in Ketchum, there's a mediation service that if there's a problem, we can layer in help on the ground. We're not in Ketchum, right? So it can be collaborative with different organizations, but as Hilary said, we stood up this program and we are the experts in this particular program, but there are similar programs being run internally from other towns, and we encourage people. They reach out to us and say we want to do this ourselves. We're happy to tell you how we do it. It's not magic, but it is a lot of work. I'm talking to hundreds of homeowners and qualifying tenants. It's a ton of paperwork and compliance and auditing, and we have built a lot of systems around it. So yeah, we can talk more in depth. Oh yeah. Yeah, totally fine. Any other? Yeah. Yeah, for lease to locals, definitely. ADU could be rented. For deed restriction, I don't think you deed restrict ADUs. So, yeah.
Not through this program. We do have other ADU incentive programs for building ADUs, and they come with strings attached of deed restricting it, so it has to be sort of lived in full time by a member of the workforce or by the owner if they're long-term renting main house. But we do certainly allow for and encourage, if you have a spare bedroom in your house, by all means, let's utilize that bedroom and long-term rent that out.
And they can get that incentive, but still continue to use it as a vacation home and be a room scenario.
Yes. I think the majority, well, you tell me, is it mostly long-term residents or is it part-time residents who are doing that?
Yeah, I mean, so we've tried some interesting scenarios and actually piloted with the Telluride. I'm blanking on the. Kai, do you remember the name of the Telluride organization? I'm blanking on it now.
It was the Telluride Housing Trust.
Well, and so their big idea was, yeah, there's a lot of extra rooms in Telluride and back areas like where the pilot would stay in Telluride, literally. Yeah. And so what if they came and go and you had a tenant in there? We found that there was just really not a lot of interest with the second homeowner and sharing space with the tenant. It's more of, I live in this house and I've got an extra room and I've never rented it before, or something's changed, multi-generational, the kids have moved out and we want to have, we want to help out and the incentive is attractive. So there's not, we haven't seen a lot of scenarios where there's a mix of vacation homeowner, sometimes with the ADU, but not as much with the private room.
We only do that like at point of construction for ADUs versus splitting it. There is new legislation in California that it's a little bit complicated, but allows for lot splits so that you could sort of separate the ADU from the primary dwelling and create two parcels. It has to be adopted by the local jurisdiction, and we haven't done that. So I think if you did something like that, you could do a deed restriction. Generally, deed restrictions go with the parcel, so it gets a little bit complicated.
Yeah. Well, I will say, I don't know my watch on, so I don't know how much time we have. We are hosting a housing happy hour later after Bill McKibben at Breckridge Breck Tap House. And I don't want to take away from the thunder that this is Truckee. We're talking about Truckee. Nantucket is a whole nother level, but they have ADU by right. Most properties have multiple carriage houses, cottage houses, things like that. And there's a lot of money, but there's also a lot of people that this is their third or fourth home. And so we find the life cycle of the Nantucket home is such that, well, the kids were using it for a while and then they're off to college, so now it's free, but we're going to keep the main home for our once a year visit and we'll rent the back cottage. So it's a lot of smaller back cottage type units. The joke we always have is like, okay, so when we're looking for like what's the threshold, it has to be a little bit higher there because the assessed values are so much higher, so we don't discount the person with FU money that might want to be, involved in this and interested in this, but we found mostly it's either full-time residents or people that have lived in some capacity full-time or know a full-time resident and they're interested in kind of that. They're also in that market doing multi-year incentives with lease to locals too, because it's so attractive to go back to short-term renting or using it or selling it. So they do 100% of the incentive in year one, 50% in year two, 25% in year three. So it's a model of kind of a step down. And they're also really heavily investing in deed restriction. Their goal is $500 million to spend on deed restrictions in the next 10 years by hopefully getting us a transfer tax, 1% of every sale. Massachusetts keeps trying to push this through. There's some really interesting stuff going on in Massachusetts with the seasonal communities delegation that you guys could look at as models where you take, there's a whole bunch of stuff they've done at the state level that then can trickle down and be opted in at the town level. So I can share more in person too. It's really fascinating. Kai actually works on most of that stuff. So my team, my wife.
1 minute left if there's one last question. Otherwise we'll wrap up. Thank you all.
Thank you.